Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Canine Cannibalism. Today we are going to be taking a look at All Smiles Until I Return by Aron Beauregard. The book is 116 pages, broken up into a myriad of chapters. They weren't numbered, so I didn't count them. And I will give you a quick blurb. Our main character, Andy, is just a normal wage slave, and life mostly makes sense. Until a sudden act of violence sends him into a horrific world of which he has no knowledge. That's your plot. Or that's your blurb, rather. If you're unfamiliar with my videos, I'm going to be doing a myriad of things in this video. I'm going to be giving you a content sample, which you can think of as kind of a trigger warning. It's more of a novelty thing than a trigger warning. It's just a list of all of the horrific shit that happens in a given book. Non-specific, but a list of horrific shit nonetheless. I'll be giving you a pre-summary review, a summary, and I don't remember if I have anything to say after the summary. I might. We'll get to it when we get to it. So, first things first, let's jump into a content sample, shall we? If you were to pick up a copy of All Smiles Until I Return and read it, you would find all of the following. You have your bog standard, gore, torture, mutilation, and death. You also have genital mutilation in this book, and suicide. Pretty violent descriptions of suicide, actually. There's also sexual abuse in the book, including sexual assaults and rape. Now, there's no penis in vagina rape, but there is forced penetration of foreign bodies into people. So, there's also child abuse in the book, including physical abuse, murder and death, sexual abuse, and infanticide. There's also one scene with urine, which heavily plays into the whole child abuse thing. Use your imagination. Or don't. Maybe don't. And yeah, that's it for your content sample. Not the most intensive thing in the world, but it's kind of fucked up. I'm not going to lie to you. Let's get into a pre-summary review. All right. This is, at least to me, Beauregard's best book yet that I've read. All right. I've only read 4 of his other books. That would be the 2 Slob books and the 2 Playground books. Okay. So this is the 5th book I am reading from him. It is the only standalone book that I'm reading from him. Yet I have more on my shelf that I will get to soon. And it's the best out of the other 4 out of the 5 total that I've read. All right. It's pretty good. He seems to have a lot of the prose toned down. All his fucking alliterative prose that he uses. Dialogue isn't as cringy. Overall, I think it's a step up. And I don't want to sit here and be like the prose is fucking brilliant. Because in the first sentence, we have an instance very similar to the line that I called out in Playground Child of Divorce. I don't remember the exact line. It was some form of simile. Making a connection between something and a demon-possessed voodoo doll. Like, those are words that you can put in that order, and they make a modicum of sense in that order, but that is the weirdest way to get across what you're trying to get across. And we have a very similar thing right here. He alludes, or he makes the inference that a day, just like any other day, is boring, and it's like watching paint dry on a cold sore that was never going to heal. Okay, see, I kind of get what you're going for, right? It's like watching paint dry, aka it's boring as fuck, it's dull, and it's like watching paint dry on a cold sore that's never going to heal. Beneath the boring and the dull, there's also pain. It's painful, it's awful, it's gross. Okay, I get it. You can put those words in that order. And in that order, they make a modicum of sense. But why, for the love of all that is good in this world, would you put those words in that order as a simile or a metaphor? It's a fucking metaphor, actually, in this instance. And then expect me to not be like, what the fuck? Like, I'm harping on this too much. It's really not that big of a deal, but I mean, just in the first sentence. And then from that point on, the prose is actually perfectly serviceable for the most part. But it's just like, what are we doing? What are we? That's how you want that your first sentence, your second sentence. Really? We're gonna go with that. Whatever. That nitpick out of the way. Let's get into some praise. This book contains one of the most creative interpretations of the afterlife that I have ever heard of. Period. Aside from, if you want to be fucking armchair psychologist, smartass redditor, atheist mindset, I guess you could argue that the Bible is the most creative interpretation of the afterlife because it's very thorough, or more so Dante's Inferno. But I'm not gonna discount that entire religion based off of a joke. So, this book is the most creative interpretation of the afterlife that I have ever heard of. It is an oddly comforting interpretation for someone like me who spends a lot of time worrying about the afterlife, about the possibility of there being hell or even infinite nothingness, which personally I do take to be the most likely scenario. And it is horrifying and haunts me my every waking moment. So, a situation like what is described in the book, which if you can stay and watch the video when we get to spoilers, you will find out what that situation is, so stay tuned. It is oddly comforting. However, given how the book progresses, the ending is far from comforting. I think that's really all I can say without spoilers, at least my opinion wise. So we're going to jump into our ratings now. If you are unfamiliar with my rating system, I take certain aspects of a book and I rate them. Pretty fucking simple. These first ratings are on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst, 10 is the best, 5 is completely mid, not good, not bad, just there. For your plot and plot direction, for All Smiles Until I Return, it's going to be a 6. As I said, one of the most creative interpretations of the afterlife that I have heard of. Period. End of discussion. There are some other issues that kind of take away from how creative the story is. It's a little jarring towards the end. It jumps a little back and forth, and you'll understand more what I mean when I read you or give you a plot summary, but it jumps back and forth between two situations a little too fast for my tastes. It feels like it could have been fleshed out a little more toward the end, and that Beauregard was maybe in a rush to finish it. I don't know. It just seems like it needs a little tender love and care at the ending. That's just my opinion. I like the way that it ends. It is soul crushing in a good way, not like the ending of Son of the Slob, which just kind of felt necessary because it's extreme horror. It felt like kind of where the book was going. I short tangent. I talk a lot of shit about Beauregard's prose, all right, and some of his story elements, his characters, his dialogue. I talk a lot of shit about Beauregard's books, period. Okay? He manages to do something very well that I don't often see, in that he takes a traditional story arc, like Son of the Slob, All Smiles Until I Return, and even Playground Child is Divorced to a certain extent. And he, a lot of times in extreme horror, the main character is evil, or the main character is never going to win. The main character is always going to die. You know this from the start because it's the tone of the book. He manages to take a seemingly normal story arc where the character goes through challenges and approaches a finish line where it seems they will come up on top, and then rip that out of that character's hands right at the last second. Now, with a situation like Son of the Slob, I really didn't like it. I don't fully remember why, but at the time it just seemed a little bit unnecessary. It seemed to fall more into the just because it's extreme horror camp. But in this instance, it is done very well, I would say. We have a main character. He goes through his character development. There's rising action. There's a climax. There's the falling action. And then everything good that happens to him gets ripped away at the last second. And it's not done in an incredibly jarring way. It's a little jarring. Again, that ties more into the issues with the ending, the plot. But I think it's done pretty well. And overall, given what I've read, it seems that he's pretty decent at that. It's not even like a twist ending, like with fucking Goosebumps or something, where every ending is just a twist or bad or whatever, just for the sake of it. He seems to be very good at that. He also seems, and I would say the aforementioned is a symptom of this. He seems to be very good at writing a traditional story arc where everything bad happens and then the characters at the end walk away victorious, aka something like Playground, which although there is a lot of suffering throughout that book, there is almost a modicum of a happy ending. Same thing with kind of Playground, wow, Jesus, Porky Pig moment. Child of Divorce, although that ending is much more bittersweet than the ending of Playground, which is also almost made to be victorious in a way, or victorious. So overall, in general, I think he has a grasp on these things that is pretty decent. And in a case like All Smiles Until I Return, I would say the ending is pretty decent and written decently well into the general flow of the book. Whew, that was a lot for one fucking rating. All right, tone. It's gonna be a 5. Fucking mid. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing great about it. I wasn't feeling a lot of what the characters felt. It didn't take me out of it at any point. There wasn't any jarring tone whiplash. None of that shit. Completely normal. Characters and character development, also going to be a 5. Completely acceptable. No characters that were jumping out of the fucking page at me. No fucking two-dimensional pieces of dog shit. I'm searching here for metaphors and similes, and they're just not really coming to me right now. Grammar and typos, also going to be a 5. No typos in this book. No incredible uses of grammar that had me aghast. Completely normal. I think you can sense a pattern here at this point. Dialogue, it's a 6. Best dialogue of Beauregard's that I have read thus far. Seems completely like what a normal person would say in certain situations. Nothing that's cringy or jarring. It's all very good for the most part. And there are a couple of scenes where the dialogue feels very, very real. And for that, it's a 6. Prose, going to be a 5. Overall, I would say that it is, as I said in the beginning, better than most of his other work that I've read. But certain things, like the line that I read you, knocked it back down a few pegs, or 1 or 2 pegs. So, it's a 5. Personal enjoyment, it's going to be a 6. I got pretty into how creative the world was, but it's very short-lived. And it's not fully fleshed out in a satisfactory way. Not that it needs to be fleshed out fully. It's very Lovecrafty and beyond human understanding, etc. But just the characters didn't have a lot of time to experience the world, and it felt kind of, as I said, rushed toward the end. So kind of took a little bit away from that for me, but I really did enjoy the setting. These next 2 ratings are your disturbing factor and your gross out factor. They are rated on a scale from 0 to 10. 0 being not gross, not disturbing at all. 10 being the most gross, the most disturbing that you can imagine. For All Smiles Until I Return, the disturbing factor is a 5. It's decently disturbing, but it's a bit fantastical at certain points to be like super disturbing. It's really hard for me to take a lot of it seriously because it throws a lot of really disgusting foul shit at you at once, and then not really much again after that. And I've said this before, because there's a book doesn't have to be disturbing to be good in the extreme horror genre. There's no reason that has to be the case. It just needs to meet some of the criteria to be considered extreme horror. I have read books that are not very disturbing, not very gross, and they were very good. I have read books that are very disturbing and very gross and are okay. I'll say that. They're okay. I'm not going to sit here and tell you something like Zola was groundbreaking, but it was okay for the most part. Your gross sum factor in this book is going to be a 3. There's not a lot with stuff like urine or feces or vomit or pus, but there's a lot of things being inserted into people swimming in blood, orgies, that kind of stuff. It's a little gross. So that about sums up our ratings. We are now going to jump into a plot summary. Aside from the fact that it is a summary, so it is not the entire book, the entire plot, I also purposefully leave things out so that you may, as a reader or a prospective reader, go and have a completely different experience. I'm not going to tell you all the gory little details that may get more clicks. So, what I'm saying is go read the book, go form your own opinions. That's always good. All right. Either way, spoiler warning, heavy spoilers. I'm going to tell you major plot points now. So click off if you don't want that, but I digress. Andy is working a dead-end job. He is called to a meeting, at which point one of his coworkers goes postal and kills their manager, Andy's crush Janie, Andy, and himself. Andy wakes up falling. He is brought down to a surrealist fleshy plane where he is boiled and cut and pulled apart by mutants and tortured, healing and regrowing every time. He is also forced to engage in visions, and it is unclear if these are actual real events that are happening in the mortal plane, or if they're just visions, where he commits heinous crimes. He bashes an infant's head into glass until it cracks, that kind of thing. A disembodied mouth explains that he is being prepared and hardened. He doesn't know for what. After his last vision, Andy is reunited with the people he died with and vows to help Janie return to her children on the mortal plane. They travel through a hellish landscape, and his manager is seemingly lost along the way. The remaining 3 are brought to a room and are forced by a strange hominid covered in black thorns to show their worst memory. It is revealed that the nutso co-worker committed the shooting because he's an incel and Janie wouldn't give him the time of day. He vows to rape Janie and runs away. In addition to this, Janie sees that Andy tried to save her and she immediately falls for him and then falls onto him, and they have passionate sex. They then do what is referred to throughout the book as re-entering. They re-enter. They are let into a vast, endless plane composed of meat, blood, and bone, full of billions of people, all presumably dead people, we'll get to it, all engaged in orgies of sex and violence. They are approached by a portly man named Fink who offers to give them information for a price. He takes them to a toothy mountain of meat that he calls his home. He explains that as payment he wants entertainment. Specifically, he wants Andy and Janie to enact a gum job. So Andy breaks out all of Janie's teeth, breaking her jaw in the process, and then she goes down on him. I will reiterate that every time that they die or get harmed, they regenerate, regrow. So she's not maimed forever, but it's a rather fucked up scene. After this, Fink, satisfied, having come on his own stomach, begins to explain. This plane is the truth of existence, a place without death and disease that Fink calls eternity. It is inhabited by the scaly, pitch-black hominid creatures that are called thorns by the humans. Their technology and science is far beyond human comprehension, to the point where they're essentially gods. They do things that seem supernatural, but are presumably based in some form of science, whatever science exists in their plane of existence. The Thorns, a while back, it's unclear how long ago, if time even really matters in a place like this, they went through a period of societal depression at a seeming lack of purpose to their existence. Thus, they created humans and the human plane, which is, I take to mean that the humans are kind of in a matrix pod, where they're inundated with visions similar to the one that Andy was shown, but just as a life instead of just random acts of violence. Again, very, very far beyond comprehension. They're talked about like they are physical beings, a species that was created and then put into like a simulation, as opposed to like ethereal beings that are made physical after their death. It's confusing. It's Lovecraftian. After their deaths, humans are brought back to eternity, thus the term re-entry. You cannot die. You can regenerate all wounds. The only bodily functions left are blood and sexual functions, so that the humans may serve as further entertainment and be able to entertain themselves as they rot eternal. Thorns, as a species, revel in pain and are horrified by happiness. Happiness is their own invention, much like how humans invented horror movies. When they watch humans engaging in acts of kindness, it is like watching a horror movie. When they watch humans engage in acts of violence, it is like watching a feel-good rom-com. Humans only hate pain and suffering because they are programmed that way. Janie wants to get back to her kids, but it isn't possible. However, there is a way to see them. Fink takes the three of them to an outcast Thorn named Belle Thorn, fittingly, who enjoys happiness, which I mean, if you think about it from the Thorn's perspective, is kind of like a human being obsessed with death and violence and wanting to enact grisly murders. So, kind of, I guess, justified that he's an outcast. He allows Janie to see her kids, but is unable to send her back. Andy then wakes up suddenly from a coma in the mortal plane. Over the next few months, he devises a plan to go back to Janie and bring with him her kids. He smothers her two daughters, shoots off her abusive husband's leg, and kills himself. Back in eternity, as soon as he is able to come across Janie again, something Fink refers to as the lottery begins. All of the humans are brought up to a great platform in the sky, and a few thousand are thrust into an electric ball. Andy is one of these unlucky few. He then wakes up having been reincarnated as a baby girl. He worries that he will start losing his memories and vows to kill himself as soon as possible. As the years go by, he does start to lose his memories, and just when he gets his chance to throw himself down a set of stairs, he is lost. And the book ends. Post-summary stuff. As I said, end the eternity that you are faced with upon death. It's almost comforting in a way. It describes an eternal existence in an originally intended state. You are born in this plane into a simulation, and then you are ripped back into this plane. It's again very unclear how all of it works. Fink even says at one point that he's had some of these concepts explained to him, but they're beyond his understanding. But the point is that you don't die, you return. You are ripped out of the simulation in which you lived. It's different to a lot of things that I've heard about. I mean, it's very similar to something like The Matrix, but even in The Matrix, when you die, you die. It's not, you don't re-enter where you were originally. I'm sure there are other takes that are very similar to this take on eternal existence after death, but it is the first time I've heard of something like it. So in the book, even though we as humans are programmed to hate pain and suffering, programming can be broken, and you can get used to pain. You can really get used to any amount of pain from the stories I've heard. So in this eternity, you have an eternity to learn and discover and experiment, which is why things like blood and cum are left on, where life was the illusion and this death is the truth. Fink says that he manages to learn all of the languages, pretty much all of them. He knows the truths about Jesus, who Jesus actually was. He says he's from he's a casualty of the 100 Years' War, Fink is. So you have a long time, an eternity, to learn and experiment and discover. And it's rather interesting. And it's something I could really get behind. I mean, obviously, an eternity of happiness where all things are achievable would be preferable. Something like what The Good Place seems to be in the beginning of the Good Place show. But short of that, and faced with a probable endless nothing, this end is almost, if not clearly preferable, and it is definitely preferable to something like eternal punishment for mortal sin. So, I mean, it's really like this, right? I would choose nearly any pain over death, and I'm a very fortunate person who has not had to experience a lot of pain, and maybe my thoughts would change if I did, but I know there are people who have experienced a lot of pain who would choose any pain over death, and that's kind of just what this is. Instead of what I perceive death to be as endless nothing, we are given a shot at an eternal existence. However, you do have to suffer pain, at least in the beginning, and then probably throughout as you grow bored. You have to suffer pain. You have to suffer agony. You have to be ripped apart and boiled and cut to pieces and put back together again. It's an agony I could not imagine, but at a certain point, I think it would be worth it, as opposed to something like endless nothing, and definitely obviously preferable to something like infinite punishment, which this is not it. This is not something like hell where you are punished in a myriad of horrible ways for all of eternity, psychological and emotional and physical. It is not that. And that would most certainly not be preferable to something like infinite nothingness, at least in my opinion. And so ends my tangent on the end, or the end of life in all Smiles Until I Return. And I'd just like to say that the ending sucked my soul out, because I was kind of looking forward to a bittersweet ending, like with Playground, where Andy goes and is with Janie, and maybe they fight a little bit over the fact that he killed what is killed anymore, when this is truth and the other place is a lie. He killed her kids. I was looking forward to that, and then it just immediately goes into the lottery, and he is reincarnated, and that's the part that is a little bit jarring, because he's back in the mortal plane, and then in like the next chapter he's back in eternity, and then in the next chapter he's back in the mortal plane, and there's like not a lot in between, like for furthering of a plot. So I feel like this could have been stretched out like even longer, or could have had a sequel, really. I think that kind of the kibosh got put on that with Andy's death, which, I mean, what is death anymore? I guess because his memories and who he was is lost. That's about as close to death as you can come. I mean, it's really just like, here's a story that's really fucked up and disturbing, but is almost nice, and then it all gets torn apart. It's really what it is. It's just sad and fucked up. And I don't really think that's a bad thing in this case. I think it was done very, very well. And yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. I read all of my comments. I'll drop a heart, drop a like. If it's something that I feel I can add to, I'll respond. If you have any questions of me, ask them, and I'll respond within reason. But hey, how'd you get into extreme horror, that kind of thing? I'll respond to you. If you have any recommendations, drop them. I have a long, long, long list. So chances of me ever reading a book you recommend, very slim, unless it's already on my list. But I do always take recommendations into consideration and look into them. I don't just say that I'm going to do that. I do actually do that. I look them up and do a little research. Who knows? Maybe it'll look really, really fucking interesting, and I'll do it as like a video in a couple of months. Whatever. Form your own opinions. Please go read the book. Highly recommend you read the book. I'll leave a link in the description where you can find a copy of the book and buy it and read it. Always important. And that's about it. See ya.